Autumn, 1775. Across the Atlantic, beneath the cold chandeliers of London, a king stares at a map and makes a decision that will decide the fate of an empire or shatter it forever. King George III no longer speaks of reconciliation, speaks of punishment. In his eyes, the American colonies are no longer misguided children. They are traitors. Dangerous men who have forgotten who protects them, who feeds their trade, who owns their loyalty. And now the king is done waiting. What happens next will drag farmers into battle, priests into politics, families into exile, and cities into flames. And it all begins far north of where most Americans expect, in the frozen shadow of Quebec. But before we go any further, if you're watching the History Sage and you want history told like a battlefield report, raw, human, and unforgiving, subscribe now, because what unfolds next isn't just about independence. It's about desperation, betrayal, and a gamble that almost destroyed the revolution before it truly began. King George believes the rebellion can be crushed with one decisive blow. 18,000 German mercenaries are negotiated for. British ports erupt into motion, ships are seized, regiments assemble. By winter, the largest expeditionary force Britain has ever sent overseas is preparing to sail. The king is confident. Once the rebels feel real pain, real force, they will submit. But across the ocean, the Americans already know something worse is coming. In Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress reads the signs. British retaliation isn't a question of if, only where and how hard. George Washington holds the main Continental Army outside Boston, keeping the British trapped for now. Across much of the 13 colonies, Patriot committees quietly replace royal authority, inspect, interrogate, and enforce loyalty. Neutrality is becoming dangerous. Silence is beginning to look like treason. But outside the colonies, Britain still holds power. The West Indies will not rebel. Florida fears Spain more than London. Native American nations watch carefully, most quietly favoring the British, the stronger ally. Then there's Canada, Quebec. Recently taken from France, it's populated mostly by French Catholics, suspicious of British rule, but newly appeased by the Quebec Act, which restores their religion and legal rights. Congress sends letters. Please. Promises. They are ignored. But Congress sees a threat. If Britain reinforces Canada, Quebec becomes a dagger pointed south, a staging ground for invasion. So the Americans decide to strike first. They will liberate Canada, or die trying. The Northern Army forms near Fort Ticonderoga, roughly 2,000 men, poorly supplied, barely trained, half volunteers, half dreamers. Their commander is General Richard Montgomery, an Irish officer with talent, discipline, and something rare among revolutionaries: patience. In September 1775, Montgomery moves north and lays siege to Fort St. Jean, the gateway to Canada. With artillery stolen from Ticonderoga, he pounds the fort for 6 relentless weeks. When it finally falls, the road to Quebec lies open. But the cost is already brutal. Disease spreads. Desertion explodes. Hunger follows close behind. By the time Montgomery marches forward, his army has been cut in half. And somewhere else, another gamble is unfolding. Colonel Benedict Arnold, ambitious, restless, brilliant, convinces Washington to approve a second force. 2,000 men will march through unmapped wilderness to strike Quebec from the rear. It's madness. Dense forests, frozen rivers, swamps, mountains, no roads. Arnold writes later that he had never imagined such suffering. Men collapse, boats sink, supplies rot. Hundreds turn back, but Arnold keeps moving. And in early December, starving and exhausted, what remains of his force reaches Quebec. They join Montgomery. Together, they now command just 1,200 men. Quebec towers above them, perched on a bluff overlooking the St. Lawrence River, 20-foot walls, over 100 cannons. The strongest fortress in North America. Inside waits Governor Guy Carleton, disciplined and prepared. He raises militia, stockpiles food, fortifies every approach. Winter closes in, enlistments expire in days. If the Americans wait, they dissolve. So they gamble everything. Before dawn on December 31st, 1775, under cover of a blinding blizzard, they attack. What follows is not glory. It is chaos. British fire tears through the snow. Montgomery is killed almost instantly. Its column shatters. Arnold is shot and carried from the field. Hundreds of Americans are surrounded and captured. The attack collapses. By sunrise, the revolution lies broken beneath the walls of Quebec. 600 survivors remain frozen, diseased, isolated hundreds of miles from help. Arnold refuses to retreat. He holds on, barely. And while the northern gamble collapses, something extraordinary is happening elsewhere. In the dead of winter, a 25-year-old bookseller named Henry Knox drags 59 heavy cannons across 300 miles of snow, mountains, and frozen rivers. 2-ton guns, on sleds, pulled by oxen. Against all reason, he succeeds. When Knox arrives outside Boston in January 1776, Washington knows the war has changed. The cannons are placed on Dorchester Heights under cover of darkness. By morning, British ships lie exposed. General Howe has no choice. In March, the British evacuate Boston. It is Washington's first great victory. Across the colonies, celebrations erupt, but not everyone is cheering. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans remain loyal to the crown. Loyalists are harassed, investigated, driven from homes. Mobs replace courts. Committees replace law. Families split. Neighbors turn on neighbors. The war is no longer theoretical. It is personal. In the South, British governors believe loyalists will rise if given support. Expeditions are launched. They fail. At Moore's Creek Bridge, loyalists charge with swords and are gunned down. At Charleston, British ships pound a fort built of palmetto logs, and the cannonballs sink harmlessly into the wood. Disease ravages British forces. By mid-1776, not a single British soldier remains from Virginia to Georgia. Something irreversible is happening. In April, the Continental Army marches openly. Crowds cheer. Confidence grows. And then a pamphlet explodes across America. Common Sense. Thomas Paine tears monarchy apart in plain language. He tells farmers they don't need kings. That one honest man is worth more than all crowned tyrants. The idea spreads like wildfire. In July 1776, Congress votes independence. The Declaration is signed, statues fall, lead melts into bullets, the king's image burns. But words do not win wars. And Britain is coming back. In May, 7,000 British reinforcements arrive in Quebec. Arnold retreats. Canada is lost. Then, New York. On June 29th, sails appear. Then more. Then hundreds. By July, nearly half the military power of the British Empire converges on one harbor. The British are back. And the revolution's fate now hangs by a thread. What happens next will decide whether independence survives, or whether the battle for Quebec becomes the moment everything almost ended before it truly began. Because history isn't made by victories alone. Sometimes it's forged in the failures that refuse to kill an idea. And that is the story we tell here on the History Sage. The British return does not come quietly. By the summer of 1776, New York Harbor has become a floating city of war. Masts choke the horizon. Cannon ports yawn open like teeth. Sailors crowd the decks, watching the shoreline with anticipation. This is not a raid. This is reclamation. General William Howe believes the rebellion is already dying. The Americans are untrained, undisciplined, divided. They cannot stand against a professional army, not for long. All that's required is one overwhelming display of force, and the colonies will remember who rules them. Washington knows better. From Brooklyn Heights, he studies the enemy fleet with dread. 30,000 British and German troops, 12,000 sailors, 400 ships. The greatest armada ever sent to North America. His own army, barely half that size, and with many without shoes, many without powder, many whose enlistments will expire in weeks. And yet, retreat is impossible. If New York falls uncontested, the revolution loses its credibility. If Washington's army is destroyed, the revolution itself may die. And Washington understands something terrifying. This war will not be won by courage alone. It will be won by survival. The first blow comes in August. British troops land on Long Island, flanking American positions with ruthless precision. What follows is not a battle. It is a collapse. Patriot lines crumble. Units scatter. Officers lose control. The East River becomes a trap. By all logic, the Continental Army should be annihilated, but fate intervenes. Under cover of fog and night, Washington evacuates 9,000 men across the river, silently, miraculously, escaping destruction by minutes. The British are stunned. Washington lives to fight another day, but the cost is brutal. New York City is abandoned. Fires rip through its streets. Loyalists cheer the king's return. Patriots flee north, bitter and shaken. Across America, doubt creeps in. Independence was declared, but can it be defended? And far away in Canada, the failure at Quebec continues to echo. The dream of a united Northern Front is dead. French Canadians do not rise. Instead, British control tightens. The Northern invasion meant to secure the revolution becomes its greatest humiliation, and yet, something strange happens. It hardens. Every defeat teaches. Every retreat forges discipline. Every loss clarifies what this war truly is. Not a rebellion, a birth. In camps from New Jersey to Pennsylvania, soldiers endure cold, hunger, and despair. Men desert. Others stay, not for pay, not for glory, but because going home would mean admitting that the sacrifices were for nothing. Washington writes letters late into the night. He begs Congress for supplies, for authority, for unity. He learns to command not through orders alone, but through example. He stays when others would flee. Winter descends. In December 1776, the revolution stands on the brink of extinction. Morale collapses. Enlistments expire. The army shrinks by the day. British officers celebrate. The war, they believe, is nearly over. Then, on Christmas night, Washington crosses the Delaware River. Through ice, through darkness, through a storm that numbs fingers and kills horses. At Trenton, he strikes. It is swift, violent. Total, the victory is small, but its impact is enormous. The revolution breathes again, and slowly the world begins to take notice. France watches. Spain calculates. The failure at Quebec, once a disaster, becomes a lesson. The Americans learn they cannot win alone. They need allies. They need legitimacy. They need time, and time is something Washington is finally learning how to steal. Years later, when the war ends, few will remember the frozen streets beneath Quebec's walls. Fewer still will remember the blizzard, the blood, the broken assault that failed so completely. But without Quebec, there is no Boston victory. No hardened army, no patient Washington, no understanding that independence would not come through triumph alone, but through endurance. The battle for Quebec was lost, but the revolution survived. And sometimes, history is shaped not by the battles you win, but by the ones that teach you how not to lose again. That is the truth behind American Revolution, the battle for Quebec. And that is why, here on the History Sage, we don't just tell you what happened, we tell you why it mattered.